My name is John Griffin, and this is the second in a series of short videos on the subject of a universal basic income. The first video explained what a UBI is and is not, and this video will explain why our country needs a UBI. I will give more than one reason why we need a UBI, but the first and most important reason is straightforward. We simply no longer have enough worthwhile jobs for all who need and want them. A good job has been the path by which the average person could enter the ranks of the middle class, and that path is no longer available to a large and increasing share of our population. How have we reached this situation? The answer to that question is also simple. Automation, computerization, corporate mergers, and globalization are responsible for the elimination of those good jobs. Since those same processes will continue, the job shortage will only get worse. Before I provide evidence for that statement, I will give a quick summary of why a UBI is a logical solution to this problem. As I mentioned in the first video, society has accumulated, since the dawn of civilization, a large body of knowledge and technology. Society has also built considerable and expensive physical, educational, legal, and military infrastructure. Without that societal infrastructure, today's businesses would be much less prosperous or even non-existent. That infrastructure is the rightful property of all citizens. Therefore, we should expect businesses to pay for the use of that property. In the past, payment was made in the form of worthwhile jobs. However, in this age of ever-increasing automation, not enough worthwhile jobs are being created, so another method of payment is necessary. That method of payment is the universal basic income. As promised, I will present evidence that automation, computerization, etc. are responsible for the elimination of many good jobs. To do this, I will use economic data from several sources, but I should mention that this video was produced during the economic disruption of the coronavirus pandemic. That disruption caused extreme changes to economic statistics that could distort any conclusions that are drawn from them. Therefore, I will only be using statistics from periods prior to the pandemic. Many people like to point out that over time, technology and automation have created more and better jobs than they have destroyed. Others will agree, but will point out that that is no longer true. Let's examine the evidence. This chart shows the distribution of our labor force by economic sector from 1840 to 2010. Economists often divide our economy into three sectors: agriculture, which includes hunting, fishing, forestry, and farming; industry, which includes construction, mining, and manufacturing; and services, which is conveniently defined to include everything else. That is nice because it makes the percentages on this chart add up to 100%. We see that in 1840, nearly 70% of our labor force was involved in agriculture. Since that time, due to automation and the disappearance of small family farms, the agricultural labor force has declined to where it is less than 2% of our overall labor force today. And yet we have all of the food we need and a nice surplus for export. Clearly, automation has not created more and better paying jobs in agriculture than it destroyed. But then, no one claimed that automation would create new jobs in the same sector in which they were lost. And in fact, we see that the percentage of our labor force in the industrial sector increased steadily. But then, in 1950, the percentage of workers in industry also began to decline. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, U.S. manufacturing employment peaked in 1979 and by 2019 had fallen by over 1/3. Clearly, automation has not created more and better jobs in industry than it destroyed. Many people like to claim that our declining industrial employment was a result of sending production work overseas. But consider these numbers. U.S. manufacturing employment fell by over 26% between 1987 and 2019. However, in that same period, our inflation-adjusted domestic industrial output increased by 67%. Not only did our domestic production increase, the output per worker more than doubled. The fact that only one worker is now needed to produce what used to require two is not the fault of overseas labor. It is simply due to improved automation. Some employers will claim that the reason they hire fewer workers is that they can't find enough workers with the proper qualifications. But when you look beneath the surface, you find that those jobs often don't pay enough to justify the time, effort, and expense of training and the cost of relocating to take the job. And consider the fact that in the U.S., the percentage of people with 4 years of college has increased from about 12% in 1970 to over 30% today. And yet, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 260,000 Americans with bachelor's degrees were earning the federal minimum wage or less in 2013. And that was more than double the number in the same situation in 2005. On the value of more education, I offer the following quote from Martin Ford's book, Rise of the Robots. "We are running up against a fundamental limit, both in terms of the capabilities of the people being herded into colleges and the number of high-skilled jobs that will be available for them if they manage to graduate. The problem is that the skills ladder is not really a ladder at all. It is a pyramid, and there is only so much room at the top." So, workers have been forced off the farm and out of the factories, but since the unemployment rate is low, they must be finding work in the services sector. So everything is fine, right? No, everything is not fine, because the unemployment rate is a misleading statistic. The unemployment rate is defined as that percentage of workers who are actually looking for work but are still unemployed. It does not count those who are so discouraged they have dropped out of the labor force altogether. Those dropouts are accounted for in the labor force participation rate. This slide shows the U.S. labor force participation rate for men and women, separately and also together. The participation rate is defined as the percentage of working-age persons who are currently working or are actively looking for work. For men, that percentage has been declining steadily, from 87% in 1950 to under 70% in 2015. The only thing that caused our overall participation rate to increase after 1950 was the increased participation of women. The participation rate for women rose from 33% in 1950 to 60% in 2000, but has been declining since then. The result is an overall participation rate that, as of 2015, stands at a 38-year low. So automation and consolidation have driven workers off the farm and out of the factories, and the declining labor force participation rate shows that the services sector has failed to absorb all of the displaced workers. The bottom line is clear. Technology and automation no longer produce enough jobs to make up for those that they destroy. But the situation is seen to be even worse when we consider how worker compensation has fared. This chart shows real per capita GDP compared to real median personal income in the 30 years between 1986 and 2016. As you know, the median level is the level at which half are below and half are above. The fact that per capita GDP is notably larger than median personal income shows that much of our national output is not reaching the typical worker. And the fact that median personal income is up just 28.5% in those 30 years, while per capita GDP is up 60.3%, tells us that disparity is only increasing. This is clear proof that trickle-down economics does not trickle down. The reason is quite simple. Supply and demand. Computerization and automation have simply resulted in less demand for our labor, and personal income has suffered. All of this evidence stands in support of the first and foremost reason we need a UBI. We simply no longer have enough worthwhile, good-paying jobs for all who need and want them. That same evidence also brings us to the second reason we need a UBI: to correct an unjustifiable level of income inequality. Remember, a good part of the value created by entrepreneurs and businesses is due to their use of society's infrastructure. The same is true for highly paid individuals, such as sports stars and media celebrities. They make far more than their predecessors of just 40 years ago because our infrastructure enables them to reach a much wider audience. That infrastructure belongs to all citizens. If its use is not being paid for through the creation of decent jobs or through a universal basic income, then the value of our infrastructure is being misappropriated. I understand that that is a powerful statement, that I am essentially saying that an ongoing theft is occurring. But that needs to be said, and it needs to be heard. The general public needs to understand this situation because a UBI will not be enacted until the public demands it. The push for a UBI will not come from the top because those at the top are the ones who are benefiting from the status quo. And this brings us to the third reason we need a UBI: to save capitalism. A natural goal in a capitalist economy is to reduce costs by replacing human labor with less expensive and more efficient automated machinery. Reducing costs is a laudable goal, but only if everyone shares in the results. If a UBI is not enacted to enable that sharing, then an angry public may sweep aside our capitalist system and replace it with something that will not benefit any of us. At this point, I would like to recommend an excellent TED Talk titled "Beware, Fellow Plutocrats, the Pitchforks Are Coming" by Nick Hanauer. He makes an eloquent case that a UBI can save capitalism, even though he never mentions a UBI. At one point he says, "What do I see in our future today? I see pitchforks, as in angry mobs with pitchforks." However, his solution is simply to raise the minimum wage, but of course that only works for those who still have jobs and does not make a significant dent in income inequality. I will also offer the following quote from Andy Grove, co-founder of Intel Corporation and a champion of our capitalist system. He says, "Our generation has seen the decisive victory of free market principles over planned economies. So we stick with this belief, largely oblivious to emerging evidence that while free markets beat planned economies, there may be room for a modification that is even better." This brings us to the end of this second video on the subject of a universal basic income. Once again, I direct your attention to the companion website for these videos. The address of that website is pinned directly below. In the next video, I will discuss additional effects that a UBI will have on our society and economy. I thank you for watching.